So Liam Bop Roe, as he was known by his friends, I think the first time he featured on the front page of the Sunday World was in the aftermath of a shooting in the Red Cow. And I think I actually answered that phone and passed the call on to you that I think it was a Saturday morning. Was it when that came in?
That was a Saturday morning, and this was the famous incident at the Red Cow, which just preceded the Regency. Now, Liam Roe had been known to us before that. We had photographed him out at City West Hotel in the company of Daniel Kinahan and Christopher Jr. We had photographed him regularly in the company of his cousins, Liam and David Byrne. And he was one of the Kinahan crew, basically.
Yeah, I mean, even back into the Crumlin-Drimnagh feud, Liam Roe was named as being a part of what was called then the Fat Freddy gang, really. So that was even back to the turn of the century.
And we'll go into a little bit of his family history in a minute, because this was a kind of a blood bond that they had, as well as just a sort of a grouping or a gang. But yeah, on this particular day, it was a Friday night, and it was in November. 2015, and there was some sort of a boxing event in Dublin, and the Kinahan brothers were over, Daniel and Christopher Jr., and there was a whole crew of the Kinahans around. There was a kind of a weigh-in that night in the Red Cow Hotel, and an incident had occurred. So the first information that came in was coming through what I'll say was somebody who witnessed it.
Yeah.
And this individual knew Liam Roe and knew the rest of them, wasn't actually with them, but had witnessed what happened, and described that Liam Roe had come out of the event, out the front of the Red Cow car park. He was smoking a cigarette, and he sort of either noticed something or something happened in the car park, and he ran back inside into the weigh-in, and the next thing, everybody fled in cars, including Daniel Kinahan, who was driven away. I think that cameras around the area then picked up this particular car that was in the car park. There seemed to be 2 occupants in it. There was some suggestion that maybe they had what looked like a firearm, that it may have jammed, or that they may have been spotted by Liam Roe. So, that's a sort of an eyewitness. Obviously, that has to be followed up. You couldn't just go with that. The follow-up was that I knew that the Gardaí had been alerted by the time the Gardaí came to the Red Cow that night. The Kinahan crew were all gone to the Four Winds. But a car was later found burnt out.
Yeah.
That car was reported. There was nobody found with it, and I think it was torched, so there was no forensics to be got. But the moving parts of what had happened were coming together. The CCTV that was gathered out at the Red Cow was showing this sort of incident.
See, this had all, of course, come just weeks after the murder of Gary Hutch in Spain.
Yeah, he was murdered in the September of 2015 in Spain.
So
tensions were really, really high at the time.
Yeah, and there hadn't been another incident since the murder of Gary Hutch, but it was being flagged up. But nothing had really kicked off, and this was probably the first thing that was being put down to a reprisal from the Hutch side. It was
certainly, there was no complaint made. There was no official complaint made to the Gardaí. So they were sort of investigating, almost intelligence gathering.
Yeah.
Doing essentially what we were doing with the story, because, there wasn't a kind of an investigation launched as such because nobody complained, but they had followed up this incident that had been reported to them. But it was really, really serious. And I remember talking to very good contacts of mine at the time. I had established as much as I could the facts of what had happened that night. And you could clearly see that this was possibly an attempt at assassinating somebody. It didn't look like it was Liam Roe. It looked like he just happened to step out into it, notice something, and cause the panic for them all to leave. What could have happened had he not have seen them? But the conversations I had that day with very senior people involved in investigating the overall Kinahan Cartel was that this is so serious. And in actual fact, I think the headline we ran with the story was "Hits War."
Yeah.
And that's what it was.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a declaration of war. The absolute sort of nuts and bolts of it have never been properly, that is as much as we can get. What we do know in the aftermath is that a guy called Darren Kearns was shot dead coming up to Christmas of that year. He was a cocaine dealer. He would have been an associate of David Daithí Douglas, who was a sort of a friends with the paramilitaries, and another cocaine dealer had a conviction. Two guys were sort of working together. Daithí Douglas had also survived an assassination attempt before Darren Kearns was killed, and Daithí Douglas would go on to be murdered later in the feud. Freddie Thompson is serving a life sentence for that murder. But the two of them appeared to have been blamed as being the two guys in the car outside the Red Cow that night.
Yeah, and of course that's never been established by...
Well, they denied it, both of them. And in actual fact, Daithí Douglas, having survived the first assassination attempt in the run-up to the second, felt safe enough. He believed that he had provided an alibi to the Kinahan Cartel to prove that he wasn't there and had nothing to do with it.
And of course, Darren Kearns had strong ties with the Hutch through family links, through various ways, but he also had very much had ties with the Kinahan Cartel because they were all the one organisation, remember, up until a few months previously. Darren Kearns would have been, very linked in with people in Cabra that were clients of the Kinahan Cartel. So,
I don't think they were the two guys in the car, by the way.
No, I mean, I think there's other names that are going around.
Which are absolutely fascinating, and unfortunately we can't put them out there, but let's just say that they would be, the names that have been in the ether as being in that car have been far closer to the Hutch organisation than Darren Kearns and Daithí Douglas ever were. Yes,
and sort of household names nearly, you might say. But so but look, it's all a big mystery. Like in terms of, you see Garda investigations, and really what sparks it is somebody makes a complaint, a few people make statements. Daniel Kinahan wasn't making a statement. Liam Roe wasn't making a statement. But in the fullness of time, Liam Roe, who passed away this week in hospital, in St. James's Hospital, it was said in his death notice he was surrounded by family. He'd been suffering from an illness and passed away as a result of that illness. It had been an illness over a period of time. He'd gotten progressively sick. But Liam Roe, while he had never made a statement to the guards, as far as we know about this, he had contacted the Sunday World.
Well, he had denied that he was the person that was outside the Red Cow that night, that had stepped outside and had sort of sparked this panic inside. He had complained to the Sunday World, exactly, and he had said that he wasn't the one.
Yeah.
Now, look, I don't know why he would have complained about that, or why he would have said he wasn't the one unless he wasn't the one. I mean, that's logic.
Yeah.
But at the same time, in as much as I could establish through two very good contacts, an eyewitness who knew him, he was the one. And I always reckoned that you could not mistake Liam Roe.
Yeah.
A lot of people of the same age look the same, right?
Yeah.
I often say to my kids, I can't recognise you when you're with your friends, you all look the same. And they actually say, the other way around.
Right, okay.
And everyone dresses the same of certain age groups, and when they hang around together, and especially at a sporting event like this, people would have been dressed the same. They probably were in the runners, the peak caps. What were they wearing at those times? They were all in Hugo Boss, whatever, the designer gear. Do you remember? The hoodies, I think it was, wasn't it? They were all wearing hoodies and tracksuit bottoms and baseball caps and everything. So they did, and it was difficult often to, and particularly when you don't know somebody, you're looking
young
at
men
pictures
of a certain body shape and a certain size.
Exactly, so they could look the same. But to my mind, Liam Roe was unmistakable.
Yeah.
He looked totally different to the rest. And for a start, he always wore a very heavy tan.
Yeah.
Now, from years back, it was suggested that he was taking those injections, the tanning injections. But I think that people who know him would say he was just sort of almost, tan obsessed.
Yeah.
So he had this kind of strange pallor to him. And he had very bright blue sparkling eyes and very white teeth and very whites of the eyes.
Yeah.
So he really stood out. In actual fact, you kind of would have turned ahead a second time at him, at Liam Roe. And it was always that way. I mean, in the newsroom over the years, and of course, Liam Roe the next time, that was the first time maybe he was on the front page of the Underworld, but the next time he was photographed was at the Regency. He was standing with Liam Byrne as he came out of the Regency, shocked and stunned, as David Byrne is lying dead in a pool of blood in the reception. And he's with him. Again, he's taller than everybody else.
Yeah.
Liam Roe, he is, again, he stands out because of his high colour, that high tan. So look, that's where I'm coming from on it. He insisted that it wasn't him.
Yeah, and he made other complaints to other newspapers that were dealt with by the press ombudsman. One of the complaints was he was described as a crook and a criminal, which he objected to. And his objection was that on the basis of the fact that he hadn't got any criminal convictions. Now, he had been found guilty of a number of offences in court. And they were quite minor offences, in the scheme of things. One of them involved making a threat to a bouncer. There was another case where Gardaí had raided a flat he was staying in East Wall, and it was said in court that they raided the house on the belief that there was firearms being stored in the flat for use by Liam Roe and his associates. But when they got in there, they didn't find any firearms. Instead, all they came away with was fake Gucci handbags and stuff like that. And he was ultimately convicted of that, but it's obviously a minor offence.
Yeah.
But I suppose the fact that Liam Roe was involved in criminality with his cousin, Liam Byrne, was probably featured, the details of how that operated was part of the criminal assets case brought against him.
I was going to say that while going forward on this, because there's so many Liams and Lees and everybody, let's just refer to him as Bop Roe, which is his nickname, Bop Roe.
Yeah.
The Criminal Assets Bureau case against him was really what put the evidence before the courts of what he was suspected of. And he was suspected of being involved in long-term organised crime over years and years.
Yeah.
He was suspected of being a key member of the Kinahan organisation, involved in logistics, in finding, sourcing and facilitating them with safe houses.
Yeah.
And he was a little bit of a heavy kind of, whether that was just because of his size, but he was kind of like, there was no suggestion maybe that he was actually working as an enforcer, but he would have been one of those who would have been wheeled out as a kind of big burly guy to be with them.
And a person of reputation.
Yeah.
And, you could see that even in, I think it was 2011, he was arrested in the UK in Manchester along with Sean McGovern and Liam Byrne, and they were arrested and brought before a court over there in connection with alleged intimidation of a businessman looking to collect, I think the amount was something like £60,000. So he would have had that reputation and would have been known. However, you can see quite clearly that, Bop Roe would have also had a sort of a, while Liam Byrne, even people who know him and associate with him would describe him as kind of having a sinister feel, Bop Roe would have been quite a popular guy amongst, the groupings that he was in. He would have been, you can see it in the tributes.
He was clearly a bit of a ladies' man, wasn't he?
Well, a bit of a ladies' man, but also a kind of by all accounts, a kind of pleasant person on a one-to-one basis. Nobody has left comment saying he was an innocent guy who wasn't involved in criminality, but he had a kind of a popularity. People thought he was a good laugh.
Certainly within his own circle he did.
Yeah.
Look, he was relieved of quite a lot of money and items by the Criminal Assets Bureau during the cases. It was discovered that he hadn't worked or been on social welfare in years. He said he was living with his father in Mangerton Road in Drimnagh, and that the father was kind of keeping him, basically.
Yeah.
Now, he had a driver. In around 2014 or 15, the Criminal Assets Bureau discovered that he had been away 6 times, including to the US and Dubai. He had attended VIP at a Conor McGregor fight in the US. He was living a lifestyle that certainly was not reflective in the fact that he had no income whatsoever.
No, he was living a lifestyle of somebody who the sort of person who has enough money not to even bother collecting the dole.
Exactly.
Now, Liam Roe had he had a great, I suppose, factual excuse for this money that was washing around with him, because he had received, I think it was described as 300,000 in punts, was it? Or, well, I'm not exactly sure, in relation to a compensation claim back in the day. So there was occasions when I think the police had raided a house he was staying in. They'd seized 2 Rolex watches. I think they amounted to €60,000 or something. And at that point, he'd given this excuse that he'd had this money, and that was regularly
Trotted out, yeah.
Trotted out that's how he could afford that. However, even by the time it got to the Criminal Assets Bureau case, because the way the Criminal Assets Bureau look at every little bit of money you spend, and they look at all of your bank accounts, that money was long gone. So he wasn't even able to really rely on that at that point.
But you see, I think they always used to believe that they could rely on that. I mean, there was a number of people, criminals, wasn't there? In particular, there was some of them had lotto wins and all the rest of it. And it was believed that if you had that one windfall, that nobody could ask you any questions about your wealth because, that was there. But I think that was something in the past now when Bop Roe was wheeling this out to look for his Rolexes back. And, another time there was €279,000 found in a account he had.
Yeah.
He was still wheeling this out. Well, I got a £300,000 compensation claim back in 1990 whatever it was. It didn't wash anymore.
It didn't wash with the Criminal Assets Bureau because the watches were, you go to a police property hearing and the level of evidence that you present is far lower, and you give it a go. You say, I had this compensation claim and can I have my watches back. But by the time you get to the Criminal Assets Bureau, they're going to get forensic accountants to look at every little bit you spend, and they're going to look at every bank account you have. And if you have this 300,000, they're going to look at where that has gone. And if you can't show it's still there, then you're in trouble. And then, of course, Liam Roe and all of his associates, they didn't really, ultimately, they rolled over in that case and just didn't fight the Criminal Assets Bureau once they failed to get that legal aid.
Now, Bop Roe, if we just place him familiarly for anybody who doesn't, I was looking for an article here I wasn't not listening to because I thought this was an extraordinary figure that came out during the Regency trial. So during the Regency trial, there was a woman called Maria Shine who died, and she was a mother of Sadie Burns, formerly Roe, who was David Burns' mother. So basically, she was 92 years of age and she died. But there was a funeral notice at the time that showed the family, basically, that had sort of come from her. And she had 13 children, Sadie Byrne being one of them, and Bop Roe's father being another one of those 13. She had 41 grandchildren, 69 great-grandchildren, and 10 great-great-grandkids. So the Roe family as such are, and she's formerly Shine, so it's the Roe family. Now from what I know, they were a very large family of street traders from the Dublin 8 area. And there's a lot of them that we have spoken about in relation to the Kinahan Cartel, in relation to the Crumlin-Drimnah feud, who are sort of the grandchildren of this lady, Maria Shine, who died.
Now, there's obviously many of those grandchildren who have absolutely no involvement in crime.
There's 69 of them in total.
Exactly.
So that's what I'm saying. It's just this huge big family, right? 69 great-grandkids, 41 grandkids, 10 great-great-grandkids, and she had 13 kids herself. But there were many of them who were involved in that grouping. So familiar names, Liam and David Byrne. They were the sons of Sadie Byrne and her husband, James Jaws Byrne. Freddie Thompson and his brother, Richie Thompson, Freddie Thompson is serving a life sentence in prison, were cousins of the Byrnes. And their mother was a sister of Sadie Byrne, Roe. Then you have Dean Howe, who was sentenced in relation to an attempted murder of Gary Hanley. and he's another cousin.
Yeah.
Now, it's obviously his mother or something is one of them.
Liam Brannigan.
Liam Brannigan, who was sentenced at the same time for that attempted murder.
Yeah, he's a first cousin of Freddie Thompson.
As well.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was Owen Scarface O'Connor.
Yeah, who's another cousin.
Cousin, yeah.
And then obviously Liam Roe himself.
Liam Bop Roe, himself. So there was a lot of them, there were a kind of band of brothers that were related by blood, and it gave them a strength.
Yes, because you see this happens, of course, in organised crime groups across the world, not just in Ireland, that is the strongest unit. Because loyalty is really at a premium in when you're involved in those sort of organisations. And if somebody was to turn informer or go against the group, you're going against your whole family and everybody that cares for you. So that gave, I think, if you look at the Crumlin Drimnagh feud, which all of these people that we've spoken about played a role in, that family connection certainly allowed them to thrive and to build those further connections that all got brought in, where maybe the Rattigan side didn't have that as strongly, or certainly weren't as tightly connected into each other. So absolutely, that's where Liam Roe, could be so trusted, and you can see in that cab case just how trusted he is by Liam Byrne. In 2000, Bop Roe bought a house in Clondalkin and he paid something like 119,000 for it. Then eventually that house was bought off him by Liam Byrne for, I think it was 270,000. But Liam Byrne only got a 150,000 mortgage on it. So there was a 120,000 gap there. And when the cab case came to court, at no point could it be shown that Liam Byrne had handed that extra 120,000 over to Bop Roe. And that was, the judge commented on that and said it looked basically very, very suspect, that it looked like he had undersold the house for 120,000.
A little bit of money laundering.
A little bit of money laundering, a little bit of, using the money from a compensation claim. Who knows how it all worked out. But you can see when you're dealing with that sort of transactions, here's two guys who are cousins who've known each other all their lives and they trust each other implicitly that neither of them are ever going to speak about it, and any exchange of money can be done by honour, if you know what I mean. Nobody's going to rip anybody off. And so that's why Liam Roe was such was able to be trusted, I suppose, and that shows you what the family connections are so.
And in the aftermath of the Regency, Liam Byrne went to England pretty soon after the Criminal Assets Bureau kicked in his doors in the March of 2016. The Regency happened in the February. The state immediately targeted what was home, and what was home was the Byrne organised crime gang, overseen really by Thomas Bomber Kavanagh from Birmingham, but they were what would later be described as the Irish the Irish business of the Kinahan Cartel. So they were at home and they had a lot of their assets in this country, a lot of companies in this country, and they were the first kind of wave of targets here by the Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau, by the Criminal Assets Bureau, and everyone else besides. So they kind of left, a lot of them, but Roe stayed behind. And during those first waves or second waves of Criminal Assets Bureau raids, there was a pub in the North Inner City that was searched, and Liam Roe was seen to be, at that point, the proprietor of it, or certainly had a company that was...
There was a company set up. Alfie Burns was what the name of the pub at the time, on Hill Street. Bop Roe was listed as a director of the company running the pub, which is a slightly maybe more obscure thing than ownership, but that's how it's listed. And on he put down his occupation as bar manager on those documents. That was raided. It was subsequently closed down. The pub has been sold off, and it's gone out of his hands. But yeah, Bop Roe stayed. I mean, as part of that whole investigation into the pub, he actually did spend a bit of time in prison, because when he was being investigated and picked up for these major crimes, it was found out that he hadn't paid his M50 tolls he owed 7,500 or
What a
something.
nightmare. I mean,
Exactly.
that really
And,
would stress me
actually,
out.
if that were one thing, the great thing that I do feel sympathy for him, it was only 5 times on the M50.
That's like something that would happen to me.
It is.
Yeah.
So I think he'd only taken 5 trips, never paid
But
it,
he just buried his head in the sand and ignored it, and it just kept building up.
to a maximum of 1,500 for each of them.
God.
So he was put into, I think it was Mountjoy for the night, but it was a massive security incident because it was really at the height of the feud. So he had to be segregated and all of this. But yeah.
Like the pub, the location of the pub was quite, felt very Hutch territory at that time. It was kind of strange that he was, but of course it had been established, that company, before.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it was all one organisation just a few months earlier, effectively.
Yeah.
And the idea that the Kinahans wouldn't have a place in the North Inner City wouldn't have even made any sense at that time if you had thought about it.
So Roe stayed on, and while obviously the fate of Liam Byrne, and we'll come to that in a minute, he's soon to be before the courts. But Roe stayed on in Dublin, and really over the last few years, there's been little heard from him except some complaints he's made to the media. But other than that, he sort of appears to have, certainly hasn't come on my radar. I don't know about you.
No, I don't think he's come on the radar. There was some investigation into threats being made to people in Dublin over drug deaths, and at least in part, Liam Roe was at least mentioned in some of the reporting on that. However, that was, I think, being driven, some of that at least, by Liam Byrne from abroad. Liam Roe, certainly started to fade into the background. He would feature on some of the pro-Hutch social media at times. They continued to target him, continued to say various things about him. But he certainly faded into the background. And if you think, experience would tell you sometimes when these guys started making these sort of complaints to newspapers, and I think a couple of the complaints he made was about people getting his age wrong and, things like that. And then you do know probably their days at the peak criminality are past. So he did seem to live a quiet life, certainly in the last time, and may well have been suffering from a long-term illness.
Now, his family and friends are preparing for his funeral, but as we've described, he was at the heart of that wider Roe-Byrne family network. There's a condolence on the site from Frederick Thompson.
Yeah, that may well be Kate, but obviously,
he's allowed access to a laptop.
Well, no, somebody may have left it on his behalf. RIP is not RIP.ie doesn't. People put it up and they publish it in good faith.
You can put any name or whatever on it.
Obviously,
there's another one from Dan Kinahan.
Well, obviously, yeah, and then there was people like trolling basically the family.
But the Dan Kinahan one that went up, it was like, something about you're a great soldier, you were a great soldier to the end. It wasn't that smart arse that.
Well, look, it was obviously that's not the type of language he would use, Daniel Kinahan. I don't think so. Look, there was people definitely putting up all sorts of stuff about him.
Mostly nice things about him being a gentleman.
Yeah, well, I think that there is that there is that as well. Like, he did have a popularity amongst his own family, obviously, and his own friends, and not all of these guys can say that when they reach their end. There are many people that when they're gone, if criminals die in whatever circumstances, that people will really tell you, he was hated all around. But in fairness, Bop Roe, that wasn't the case.
So it was just to point out that, they're preparing for this funeral. It's 2024. Where are they now? And who would you see? When David Byrne's funeral happened in 2016, you saw the dark heart of the Kinahan Cartel, of the Irish mafia, standing out in force. You saw Daniel Kinahan, Christy Kinahan Jr., Freddie Thompson, his brother Richie. You saw them all the faces. And of course, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, the big man as he was known then from England, came back to stand front and central, a brother-in-law of David Byrne's. But, in that decade now, what they're facing is they're a far depleted force and family that will be out to pay respects to Bop Roe. Because also, at the same time as he's died, and the family are preparing for his burial. In the UK, in the Old Bailey, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, Liam Byrne and some of their associates are being given a trial date because they appeared at the Old Bailey at a hearing via a video link from Belmarsh Prison. Kavanagh and Liam Byrne, they've been in custody for some time. Obviously, Kavanagh's already serving a hefty sentence for drug smuggling and money laundering, but is now facing more serious charges on this sort of weapons plot. Liam Byrne was picked up on one of the Balearic Islands while eating with his family last summer.
Yeah.
And has been in custody in the UK since he was extradited from Spain. There's going to be some legal argument, but pretty much the trial is going ahead. They certainly haven't pleaded. It looks like it's going to happen next month in London. And it's a conspiracy charge, basically, to have a cache of guns discovered by police, which was in a bid to get a reduced sentence for Kavanagh. It's going to be a very interesting case if the evidence is heard in it. But clearly they're locked up. They're not going to be at the graveside, or certainly at the funeral mass.
And many others.
And many others are locked up here in Dublin, like many other associates, Kinahan associates and others are locked up. It's a far depleted force and family.
It absolutely is. And if you remember as well, when David Byrne's, in the run-up to David Byrne's funeral, there was this big fear that there was going to be hand grenades or whatever thrown at the church. I don't know if you remember that. Yeah, so all of this was, a genuine, real fear that something like that could happen. That's also not going to be there.
There's going to be security.
Absolutely.
There's definitely going to be security at it. I think there is still a fear, given in particular because they're a far depleted force. And
but I mean, amazingly, some of his associates, people like Liam Brannigan, people like Dean Howe, they've come before the courts, served lengthy sentences and come out and will be able to attend the funeral, having gone through that system.
But they're far more isolated than they were back then when there was this sort of powerhouse behind them and around them. And there's just so few. Others are abroad, won't be coming back.
Yeah, and there's some young criminals associated with the Kinahan Cartel that really aren't of the same level of seriousness, I suppose, as some of the people that were put away.
But if you think about the cousins and friends who would have been his closest circle, Bop Roe's, Freddie Thompson, serving life in prison, Sean McGovern, wanted here for the murder of Noel Duckhead Kerwin, living in Dubai.
Yeah.
I don't know whether Daniel Kinahan would have ever bothered coming home for or being part of Bop Roe's inner circle, but he still was a friend in the periphery. Liam Byrne in prison and David Byrne, because they were very good friends, obviously, dead since 2016. So there's a lot gone and a lot, does crime pay?
Yeah, it does. No, it certainly doesn't. So look, there'll still be a big funeral. There'll still be, I imagine, people to pay tribute to him, and there will be younger members of the family, some of them who have also come before the courts in various crimes. But yeah, it's I suppose you see, it's now approaching, what is it, 8 years since the Regency, is it? And you see how quickly the criminal underworld can change. I mean, at that point, the point of David Byrne's funeral, people remember maybe Joe Duffy covering it. And as you said, it was like this, it was almost a challenge to the state, to the power of the state. Like they seem to have that strength and power. And that's really all gone, isn't it? Now it's
for sure.
It's the idea that even within the criminal underworld that these people could dictate things is now gone. That's not to say there's not people still having a hand in things that happen, but new people are arising.
So it's a very fine balance, isn't it? You know what I mean? It's like literally a seesaw effect, and sometimes if one person steps off, all of a sudden the power
because
goes
money drives it, and the power comes from the money. And in order to have that power, they need to have a supply basically of drugs and weapons coming into to be able to amass that power around them, and to amass those younger criminals who want to make a name for themselves. All of that has gone, I think, as well from the Kinahan Cartel.
Now, we might return and cover this funeral, have a look and see if there's anybody or anything of interest to talk about. If there is, we'll come back to this. And in particular, we're going to come back to the Bomber Kavanagh Liam Byrne case trial and keeping a close eye on that. We will be talking about that, I'm sure, in the very near future. So thanks, Niall.
Thanks, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.